On the eve of the 2012 Nuclear Security Summit in Seoul, South Korea, President Obama met with Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to discuss one of the pressing issues in the United States' national security interest, military defense. How important was the issue of missile defense to the strategic relationship between the U.S. and Russia? As President Obama's Defense Secretary Robert Gates said in June 2010, upgraded missile interceptors in development, quote, would give us the ability to protect our troops, our bases, our facilities, and our allies in Europe. Gates continued, there is nothing of the minds on missile defense. There is no meeting of the minds on missile defense. The Russians hate it. They've hated it since the late 1960s. They will always hate it, mostly because we'll build it and they won't. During the Nuclear Security Summit, President Obama had a private exchange with Russian President Medvedev that was picked up on a hot microphone.
Last election, yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah. Okay. I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and understand.
President Obama said on all these issues, but particularly missile defense, this can be solved, but it's important for him to give me space. President Medvedev responded, yeah, I understand your message about space for you. President Obama, this is my last election. After my election, I will have more flexibility. President Medvedev responds, I understand. I will transmit this information to Vladimir. As we all know, it's Vladimir Putin. As you just saw in 2012, President Obama asked the Russians for space until after the upcoming 2012 election, after which he would have more flexibility. Now let me apply Mr. Jeffries and the House manager's three-part test for abuse of power. 1, the president exercises his official power. President Obama's actions clearly meet the test for exercising official power because in his role as head of state during a nuclear security summit, after asking President Medvedev for space, he promised him that, quote, missile defense can be solved. What else could that mean but solved in a way favorable to the Russians, who were dead set against the expansion of a U.S. missile defense system in Europe? 2, to obtain a corrupt personal benefit. President Obama's actions were clearly for his own corrupt personal benefit because he was asking an adversary for space, for the express purpose of furthering his own election chances. Again, President Obama said, this is my last election. After my election, I have more flexibility. President Obama knew the importance of missile defense in Europe, but decided to use that as a bargaining chip with the Russians to further his own election chances in 2012. 3, while ignoring or injuring our national interest. As President Obama's defense secretary said, missiles would give us the ability to protect our troops, our bases, our facilities, and our allies in Europe. Surely, sacrificing the ability to protect our troops and our allies would injure the national interest. Yet President Obama was willing to barter away the safety of our troops and the safety of our allies in exchange for space in the upcoming election. In short, President Obama leveraged the power of his office to the detriment of U.S. policy on missile defense in order to influence the 2012 election, solely to his advantage. And we never would have known had President Obama realized that the microphone was on, that there was a hot mic. One could easily substitute President Obama's 2000 exchange with President Medvedev into Article 1 of the House's impeachment articles against President Trump. Using the powers of his high office, President Obama solicited interference of a foreign government, Russia, in the 2012 United States presidential election. He did so through a scheme or course of conduct that included soliciting the government of Russia to give him space, quote unquote, on missile defense that would benefit his reelection and influence the 2012 United States presidential election to his advantage. In doing so, President Obama used the powers of the presidency in a manner that compromised the national security of the United States and undermined the integrity of the United States democratic process. He thus ignored and injured the interests of the nation. Close quote. Does it sound familiar, House managers? It should, as the case against President Obama would have been far stronger than the allegations against President Trump. President Obama's abuse of power to benefit his own political interests was there and is here now for everyone to hear. It was a direct, unquestionable quid pro quo. No mind reading was needed there. Where were the House managers then? And that points out the absurdity of the House managers' case against President Trump. It was President Obama, not President Trump, who was weak on Russia and weak on support to Ukraine. President Obama caved to Russia and Putin on missile defense when he decided to scrap the U.S. plans to install missile bases in Poland. Yet he criticized Senator Romney during the 2012 presidential campaign when Senator Romney said Russia was the greatest geopolitical threat to the U.S.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. And the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, the Cold War's been over for 20 years.
Now, when it is politically convenient, the Democrats are saying the same thing that President Obama criticized Senator Romney for saying. In fact, they're basing their entire politicized impeachment on this inversion of reality. This claim that President Trump is not supporting Ukraine far more than the prior administration. President Obama caved on missile defense in late 2009. His hot mic moment occurred in March 2012. His re-election was 8 months later. 2 years later, in March 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. President Trump refused to provide lethal aid to Ukraine to enable it, President Obama refused to provide lethal aid to Ukraine to enable it to defend itself. Where were the House managers then? The House managers would have the American people believe that there is a threat, an imminent threat to the national security of our country, for which the president must be removed immediately from the highest office in the land. Because what? Because he had a phone call with a foreign leader and discussed corruption, because he paused for a short period of time, giving away our tax dollars to a foreign country. That is their theory. It is absurd on its face. Not one American life was in jeopardy or lost by the short delay, and they know it. And how do we know that they know it? Because they went on vacation after they adopted the articles of impeachment. They did not cancel their recess. They did not rush back to deliver the articles of impeachment to the Senate because of this supposed terrible, imminent threat to our national security. What did they do?
The urgency.
The timing is really driven by the urgency.
Urgency. Nothing could be more urgent.
The urgency.
And urgent. And urgent.
There's an urgency, to this. And we must move swiftly. We don't have time to screw around.
It's about urgency.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still holding on to the articles of impeachment.
Urgency? Urgency for which you want to immediately remove the President of the United States? You sat on the articles for a month.